Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am Tahir Dhindsa and you're watching SDTV. Trump administration has imposed punitive tariffs on a couple of nations. Every nation where they had a negative surplus in trade, they have imposed tariffs according to a formula which they have amply given that if it's 10% surplus, then it's all right. Otherwise, they will do a formula, they import tariff. They call it reciprocal tariffs. And now it seems that instead of improving productivity, nation said they are imposing tariff on that. Usually, it is said that if a country can take unilateral decision on the military and economic side, then it's a superpower. Economic and military prowess is so huge. But if you cannot take unilateral decision, then you are a great power. And US is now, they say, it's the greatest power in the club of great powers, but not a superpower. And they are using this window of opportunity for the last couple of years before they're totally exhaust to take unilateral decision by imposing tariffs. President Trump or Trump administration are trying to do three things at the same time. One, reducing the external export negative balance to create surplus and shifting the manufacturing back to the US. And the corollary of this is that they have to manage the fiscal side and obviously inflation and monetary policy as well. And second, they want to keep the hegemony or keep dollar as a reserve currency for as long. And they are contradictory. If you bring back manufacturing and import tariff, it's bound to create inflation. To curb it that, you need to hike up the interest rate. So the danger is that if it's too much, like a drug, if it's too much, it might create stagflation. And after shifting manufacturing to United States, they might find another jeopardy as well. This is a tightrope walking. Obviously, this is beginning of a third world war. For the backdrop, I would say that the first world war continued, and the first Cold War was fought on the balance of power equation and the Soviet on surrogate territories elsewhere. Now, this is an economic and direct war, and this is the reason that the large bureaucratic and the surrogate militaries are finding themselves redundant and surplus. That's why they're not engaging with them. Productivity is the name of the game. What is the result of that? How these punitive tariffs are going to work globally and on Pakistan as well? We have today with us a very actual, genuine expert on that. A person is with us who had been economic minister in Brussels when the WTO was taking place, and he knows what does it mean, especially the Doha economic agenda. He had been the Director General Industrial Policy and couple of trade policy. And then he was also head of that think tank that was gloving together everything at the intellectual level when the CPEC was coming in. We have today with us Dr. Safdar Sohail. Doctor, very warm welcome. Please say a few lines on what we have just said, so then we can rumble on.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me with you. The sense of wait is over now, in the sense that President Trump has been telling everybody that he would use tariffs to balance American economy and to rebalance the international political economy. And once he came into power, he started with imposition of tariffs on aluminium, on steel, phenyl related barriers on Mexico, on China. And he was promising all along that the big thing is coming, which he calls liberation on 2nd April. And now we know the detail of that also, and as you have explained in your remarks, that according to a certain formula, wherever they had significant 10% plus trade deficit, they have imposed, they call it reciprocal tariff, you can call them punitive tariffs also, as you
Whatever.
have said, but they have imposed 10% tariff around the globe on every country. They have, in a way, equalizing with the general tariff line. Let's say American applied tariffs have been very low, 2 to 3%. So they have taken it up to 10% for every country. And then, according to the formula they have, in case of Pakistan, now we would be facing additional 19% duty on our products in the US. Why have they done that? Rationale? What would be its impact in the short term, and what would be its impact in the long term on the international trading system, on the international political economy? Obviously, this is a huge topic, and has a lot of presumptions into it, a lot of approaches to that. Some would interpret it as a major effort by the US to revive its status in the world, to continue having a superior role in the world. Me being a commerce and trade officer who has spent all his life in international, regional trade settings, negotiating for the government. Also, at EU, I was DG Pakistan Institute of Trade and Development. I was DG Trade Policy also. So, having good grounding in Pakistan's own trade, industrial, and investment policy and the regional aspect, I'll reserve myself to Pakistan's prospects and threats that we could be facing. But I'll talk more in the regional context. So in the short time that we have, I'll avoid talking about international political economy. So coming to Pakistan, we were actually not expecting that Pakistan would be in that list, because initially the details were not very clear. Reuters were reporting that the policy is coming, the liberation policy, for 15 countries, and which have high levels of trade deficit. So Pakistan was not, I mean, in our own understanding, not there. But when the final policy came, the kind of formula they applied, so now we know that everybody is there. So in that context, as far as their declared objectives are concerned, that the existing global trading system has been against American interests. So that is one of their presumption, and they want to bring manufacturing back, and they want to generate revenue from tariffs also. So there I'll briefly say that these are legitimate aspirations of any government, because the kind of loss in terms of innovative capacity in an economy when you don't have manufacturing was not perhaps very clear to the Americans when they were happily offshoring the manufacturing. They did not perhaps expect the dependencies that it would create, or the rise of China, other nations also. They, you see, under the scheme of this primary, tertiary, secondary, tertiary economy, from agriculture to manufacturing to services to knowledge economy, they thought that we would be active in the knowledge economy, and with the kind of financial prowess that US had, the trade to GDP ratio in US has been traditionally very low, hardly 10%, and but their imprint on the financial markets has been tremendous. So They thought that we would design the global policies, we would have the sweatshops all over the world, and America even now accounts for 26 to 30% of global GDP. It's a very large economy. Uh, but they have realized now, according to them, that we have been facing unfair terms of trade, that we have been accepting goods from all over the world, even if those goods were backed by state subsidies or currency manipulation or other kind of support measures by the governments. Whereas our exports have been facing barriers all over the world. They give this very popular and sensitive example of cars, for example, that they would put tariff of 2.5% to the European cars, but Europeans would have a much higher tariff. Even in India, the cars would attract something like 75% of the tariff. So, on the face of it, the lack of movement in WTO after Doha Development Agenda, Americans have been trying to have a reform of the whole system, which did not happen because the developing countries were happy with the special and differential treatment which they were enjoying. And Americans were saying that, look, I mean, China is no more a developing country as such, developing market, or India is grown so big, but still they are benefiting from special and differential treatment, which needs to change. So initially they withdrew from the appellate system of WTO, uh, and now uh, they have by announcing these tariffs and forcing countries to bilaterally agree with them, they are developing their own trading system where the willing partners can negotiate with them, and they can have.
Outside the WTO framework. I'm saying because if you impose tariff unilaterally, then I mean the Doha development agenda, and that is done with.
Yeah, apparently, yes. But you see, one view is that this is a rather radical way of inducing reform in the global trading system. Americans, due to their other ideological considerations, stood for free trade, free market. So they actually had very low tariff levels. And they had this expectation that the tariffs would come down gradually, which did not happen. Even EU was not really very keen on lowering the barriers on, let's say, agriculture, or fish agreement is also very recent. So what they've done is that they've said, okay, fine, we have 10% tariff for everybody, and then they have given a kind of a bound tariff for every country. That with Pakistan, they say this is 29%.
That is
And
the maximum.
they say that this is the maximum, but we have a water in that. We can play. Let's talk to each other, and we can bring it down. But the real problem is that they're using the principles of WTO, like reciprocity, is of
What I am
course.
asking you, instead of having a similar or the same, or I mean the close some sort of principle under the WTO, every nation has to now is open up for bilateral negotiations of that,
Yeah, you see, the
where WTO is mute.
well, you see, I mean, we talk about productivity later, which is very much linked with the WTO system also. Uh, the special and differential treatment was accorded to the developing countries because they were not that productive. They were considered not that productive, so they said, okay, fine, you can have protections, you can have state support, and one day you would become as productive as anybody else. And then the principle of reciprocity would come. You see, MFN and national treatment is basically a principle of reciprocity. So what Americans are saying is that, look, if you cannot have a reordering of the system where such economies which are now very productive, very competitive, but still having state support behind them, still using currency, and when it comes to exports and when it comes to imports, so they have huge protection barriers like India, for example. So this is not the global trading system which suits everybody. So for the time being, we challenge that system. Now, for example, the principles of WTO, if EU agrees to put 2.5% tariff on American cars, but if they do it under WTO framework, then they have to multilateralize that. MFN would kick in, and China would also be able to export cars to Europe for 2.5%, which is not acceptable to the Europeans. So, in that sense, the system has been disrupted. The new system would emerge, but Americans think that as our impact on global trade is huge in terms of its import volumes, they should have a better say in setting the terms of trade with different countries initially. And once these negotiations with different countries unfold and the features come up, for example, with India, they are going to negotiate a bilateral trade treaty. This is a new phenomena. Americans have been talking more about bilateral investment treaties, but now they are talking about bilateral trade treaty. And as soon as October 2025, I think the first early harvest, you can say, agreement between India and US would be there. So that treaty would tell us more about the way the new system may be working.
I would just want to ask you a question which is very important for Pakistan. After losing US as a market, which was the ultimate destination for China, India, and all that, obviously these big countries would be in search of local markets. In our case, the giant neighbor is next door in the east, India. Do you think they would start eyeing with some interest the Pakistani market, and the pressure through the IMF and all that come to us to open up on the Indian terms, which would be counterproductive to the Pakistani interest?
Yeah, I think both parts of your question are equally important. One is that are we going to lose American market, or are the Indians going to lose American market? I think Chinese would lose significantly in American market, but not India, not Pakistan. You see, already as a result of the first Trump period tariffs, China now is no more the most important exporter to US. It is Mexico, basically. And Mexico also runs a huge trade deficit, but Mexico has been spared. So that's French shoring. That's another phenomena. All the countries of South Asia, including Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, they have been put a lot of tariffs. Pakistan is number 2 in terms of tariff escalation. That India is at 26%, we are at 29%, but Bangladesh is 37, 38, and Sri Lanka is even more than that. So if we imagine the textile market, ready-made garments in US, and if we take all these countries as major competitors, China would be creating some space for our products. Turkey and Egypt and Spain, they have far lower tariffs than us in textiles, and they are also competitors. But I would say, on balance, Pakistan's textile sector would be hurt more by the general reduction in import volumes in US. But that would impact all these
Other countries, yes.
But there is even a silver lining that if the American consumer, due to inflation that you talked about, if they go for relatively cheaper products, then Pakistan can have better prospects like we had in 2008. After that financial crisis, the American purchasing power went low, and we could sell more textile because we are placed at a rather low end of the textile
Market.
So in that sense, I think Pakistan is not perhaps going to lose much. Well, volumes would reduce, but volumes reduced in 2023 also. You see, in 2022, we exported around $6.5 billion worth of exports, which came down to 5.4 in 2023. So there have been these cycles, and
Yeah.
there.
Yes, that brings me to the question that do you think this is a result of a trade war which is going on and we are facing it, or it is strategic at the highest level with the US China, where one superpower is coming up and the other is declining. This trade war is a result of that actual strategic war, which is a Cold War, Pakistan, and it's high time now that Pakistan has to completely overhaul its economic system, its strategic system, its governance system, waiting and new partners in the region with China and all that for strategic dependence and all that. Do you think it's all high time that the Bretton Woods system is there? Obviously, we the country like us, which is not a big power, it's a middle size of a country, middle power or something. We need to put our foot in both the boats and all that. That's fairly, it's a good enough. But for the strategic reason, we need to overall the functioning democracy back home and all that. We need to completely overhaul. What do you think? And where
Well,
does the China comes in?
yeah, you see, in this situation, you can call it trade conflict. I would not like to use the word war in that. Uh, there would be geostrategic elements into it. The many of the countries which have been included in the list and are facing high tariffs, like Cambodia, Laos, or Vietnam, do have hefty Chinese investments there, and they would like to block that route. Also, that's one aspect.
Re-export.
Yeah, re-export, and the fear that you have pointed out that in the next phase, the Americans would perhaps through IMF, first they would ask us to reduce our tariffs, and then they would ask us to normalize trade with India to compensate India for the loss of market that they may have in US. And there, I perfectly agree with you that opening trade with India, because India would be very aggressive in finding alternative markets, would be very harmful for Pakistan. So those geostrategic aspects are there, uh, but that choice. China on one side and US India strategic military and economic might on the other. That is the real situation. I think in case of Pakistan, it's not China versus US. It's China versus India plus US. And as I said earlier, that once we have more details of the bilateral India US bilateral trade treaty, then we would know the real impact. Apparently, US would like India to become as productive as China, being a large economy, but very much closely aligned and related with the American market, as well as technology sharing, as well as defense. So a much deeper integration of Indian economy with the US economy. Now, if that happens, then it would be a very challenging scenario that we do have a geostrategic relationship with the US.
Yes, one last question. Do you think it's high time that we should do progressive, proactive, and well thought over take initiative at home, back home in Pakistan, to try to integrate our industrial policy with the trade policy? Because ultimately the exportable surplus come from industry, and if you do not integrate together, right now they are not integrated, individuals are exporting. Do you think it's because, as you know, you've been a trade minister and all that, industrial policy would be announced in one A block, the trade in the C block, and financial policy, IMF in the Q block, different, disjointed? No. Do you think it's time to integrate?
Yeah, I generally agree in the sense that what Americans are telling in practice is that trade, investment, and industrial policy go together. This reciprocal tariff is actually an announcement of America going for a very muscular industrial policy. That's what it is.
Yeah,
And they want,
exactly.
yeah, and they want investment decisions of other countries as well as trading decisions of other countries to be subservient to this muscular industrial policy. In our case, that situation that you have pointed out, disjointed policies has been there.
No.
Has been one of our major coordination problem, and we have usually gone for investment-led industrial policy or trade-led industrial policy, whereas I think the lesson from all that saga which is unfolding is that you need to have an industrial policy, manufacturing development policy for your own country to create that autonomy. And you've talked about surpluses. If we manage our manufacturing development policies better, we should reduce the duality between the international trade and domestic market. We still are talking about export-oriented industries and then helping them, even if they are inefficient, to export more due to our forex external sector vulnerabilities also, which are important. But eventually, the surpluses would come once our manufacturing is able to meet the unmet latent demand of sophisticated products within the country. So we can do that, and once we have our manufacturing feeding the local industry with standards, with better productivity, with minimum damage to the environment, then we would start having the kind of products which we would be able to sell elsewhere. So this is a good way to conclude this session, that Pakistan needs a better and a different industrial policy to wrestle with these challenges in the medium to long term.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, this topic is not a small one because after the Second World War, that P5, the winners had introduced the UN and Bretton Woods institutions and all. Now, as the Henry Kissinger in his book World Order says, that he had predicted a decade back that it would enter terminal stage at a point, and he referred that it would start from Syria, and now we are seeing happening. Economic system as well. Second, the marriage between hydrocarbon and internal combustion engine. So with this all electric and renewable, that is also towards the sunset and the reserve Karani. So it's a big change which we cannot discuss. But one thing for as a food for thought, when we are closing, Pakistan has to do footwork. And what are the markets? Last year, China exported $3.5 trillion of goods and all that. Their exports were. Their imports were $2.5 trillion. And the surplus was 1 point some trillion. US has the similar figure. They imported $3.5 trillion. They exported 2.5, and they have deficit of about the same deficit. One country is generating surplus productivity and exporting it. The other country is producing less productivity and depending on consumption for external resources. That clearly says that at the same time, when one country is rising and the other, we need to choose our word very carefully and do the footwork with the future. And that future is not very far away. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maximum next 4 years during the Trump administration. And we have to do footwork in that. One other marker is very important. For the first time in the history, this year, China did trade of about $6 trillion or more, and the US did about $5 trillion. So China is the world biggest trading nation, surpassing US by $1 trillion. The rest is up to the policymakers. So with this, we come to the end of the program. Bye for now.